Imagine trying to govern an archipelago. But instead of a chain of islands separated by warm ocean water, you're dealing with distinct, deeply entrenched cultural islands.
Right.
And they're separated by millions of square kilometers of impenetrable rock, endless prairie, and just frozen ice.
Sounds impossible, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have a front door that looks toward Europe, a back door opening up to Asia, a roof that is entirely frozen solid, and a living room where everyone is speaking two entirely different languages. Welcome to today's deep dive.
You know, it really is a logistical and, well, a political miracle that a country like that even holds together, let alone actually thrives.
And that is exactly what we are trying to decode today for you, the listener. We're looking at the geographical and civic DNA of the world's second largest country, Canada.
10 million square kilometers.
Yeah, 10 million. Bounded by the United States to the south and locked in by 3 oceans, so the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Arctic. And to understand how this massive machine actually operates, we are digging into a really fascinating primary source today. We're pulling from pages 44 to 52 of Discover Canada.
Right, which is the official study guide for the Canadian citizenship exam.
Now, I know what you're thinking, like a citizenship study guide. I'm about to listen to a textbook, but here is the secret about this specific document.
It's surprisingly gripping.
Right. If you read between the lines of the dates and the facts, it's essentially the operating manual for a nation. I mean, it doesn't just tell you what Canada is. It gives you the blueprints of how you engineer a unified state out of overwhelming, just terrifying geography.
Because the sheer scale kind of defies human comprehension. You really cannot conceptualize 10 million square kilometers all at once. It's too big. And the genius of this guide is that it breaks the country down into 5 distinct regions. Like walking through a massive house, right? You have to look at the individual rooms to understand the whole building.
Exactly. And reading this, I realized we shouldn't think of Canada as a traditional cohesive landmass. Like you said, it functions much more like that archipelago we mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Distinct economic and cultural islands connected by infrastructure and law. So let's travel to the first island, the eastern anchor, which is the Atlantic provinces.
So this is where European history first really collided with the North American continent. We're looking at 4 provinces here: Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick.
Okay.
And their capitals, so St. John's, Charlottetown, Halifax, and Fredericton, they aren't just dots on a map. For centuries, these coastal ports were the literal beating lifelines to the rest of the world.
Yeah, the source text makes it so clear that geography dictates destiny here. I mean, when you are perched on the edge of the treacherous, freezing North Atlantic, your entire society organizes around the water.
You have to.
Right. It's fishing, it's deep maritime traditions, it's these tight-knit coastal communities just pulling a living out of the ocean.
But there is a very specific political anomaly in this region that the text highlights. And it actually tells us a lot about the friction of nation building.
Yes. This jumped right out at me. So out of these 4 Atlantic provinces, New Brunswick holds a completely unique distinction in the entire country. It is the only officially bilingual province.
Exactly.
Like the whole country has 2 official languages at the federal level, sure.
Yeah.
But New Brunswick actually baked both English and French into its provincial constitution. Why just that one?
Well, because it acts as a living artifact of 18th century imperial collisions, really.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Geographically, New Brunswick is wedged right between the heavily English-speaking Nova Scotia and the deeply French-speaking Quebec. So it absorbed waves of French-speaking Acadians, and at the same time, English-speaking loyalists who were fleeing the American Revolution.
Wow. So it was just a melting pot right out of the gate.
Exactly. So that bilingualism isn't just like a polite political gesture. It is a hard-fought historical compromise that was totally necessary to keep the society functioning.
Which perfectly sets up our next massive region. Because if you travel west from the Atlantic, you hit what we could call the central engine, central Canada.
Right.
And we are talking about 2 absolute behemoths here. Quebec, anchored by Quebec City, and Ontario, anchored by Toronto.
Yeah, this is where the sheer demographic weight of the country sits. It's the industrial, the financial, and the cultural powerhouse. More than half the population of Canada lives in just these 2 provinces.
More than half. That's wild.
Yeah, just those 2.
So Toronto operates as this massive global financial hub, while Quebec pumps out incredible industrial and cultural influence. But here is where the text made me stop and scratch my head.
Oh, yeah.
If Toronto and Quebec City are these undisputed, heavy-hitting powerhouses, why is the national capital, Ottawa, sitting in what used to be a muddy logging town on the Ottawa River?
It's a great question.
It seems completely counterintuitive to put your capital outside your biggest financial hubs, you know?
It is entirely counterintuitive if you were looking at it purely through an economic lens. But, as we know, politics is about survival, not just efficiency.
Right. I read the historical trivia on this, that Queen Victoria specifically chose Ottawa in 1857. Like, did a monarch sitting all the way in London really just throw a dart at a map?
Well, it's a fun visual, but no, that dart was highly calculated.
Okay, lay it on me.
So in the 1850s, the English-speaking and French-speaking populations and their major cities, so Toronto, Montreal, Kingston, Quebec City, they were essentially in a bitter standoff.
Classic.
Right. Nobody wanted to hand the other the ultimate prestige of hosting the capital. So Ottawa was chosen precisely because it was a compromise. It literally sits right on the border of Ontario and Quebec.
Oh, so it physically bridges the divide.
Exactly. It bridges the English and French divide.
So it's basically the neutral corner so the siblings would stop fighting.
Partially, yeah. But the other massive factor was the United States.
Really? How so?
Well, Ottawa is situated significantly further inland than Toronto or Montreal. And following the War of 1812, military defense was a paramount concern. An inland capital is much, much harder for an invading army to capture from the south.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that central engine is running the finances and the defense.
Yeah.
But then as you move west out of Ontario, you hit the Canadian Shield.
Oh, the shield,
This
yeah.
massive, rocky, heavily forested barrier that just physically cuts the country in half.
Right.
But when you finally break through that, the landscape blows wide open. You enter the third region, the Prairie provinces.
Right. Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And moving from the dense urbanization of central Canada to the prairies, it is a profound shock to the system.
I can imagine.
You are trading concrete and high finance for the raw elemental power of the earth out there.
And the scale of the agriculture here is just staggering. Winnipeg and Manitoba, Regina and Saskatchewan, Edmonton and Alberta, these aren't just cities. They are the logistical hubs for a region that operates as the breadbasket of the country.
Huge scale.
We're talking endless fields of wheat, massive cattle ranching operations, and deep, deep energy and natural resource reserves.
And this shift in geography dictates a completely different political culture, too.
How do you mean?
Well, think about it. When your livelihood is tied to global commodity prices, like the price of oil or the price of wheat, and you are physically isolated from the financial decision makers in Toronto by thousands of kilometers of rock and forest,
Right.
you develop a fiercely independent, very pragmatic perspective. The prairies bring a really necessary grounded tension to the national conversation.
Which brings us to the ultimate physical barrier, the Rocky Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
You cross those, and you drop into the fourth region, the West Coast,
Yeah.
British Columbia.
Anchored politically by its capital, Victoria, but the text focuses very heavily on Vancouver.
Right.
And, for anyone who just thinks of BC as gorgeous mountains and skiing, the text course corrects that very quickly.
Yeah, because Vancouver isn't just a postcard. It's Canada's window to Asia. I mean, if the Atlantic ports are looking backward over their shoulder at European history, Vancouver is aggressively leaning forward into the Pacific Rim.
Exactly.
It is a critical, massive commercial port and a booming tech hub.
It really is the primary connection point for the fastest growing markets in the world. The entire economic trajectory of the country relies heavily on Vancouver. It acts as a frictionless valve between the vast resources of the prairies and the massive economies of the Asia-Pacific.
So we've covered 4 regions.
Yeah.
And honestly, we're already exhausted by the sheer size of it all.
It's a lot of ground.
But there's an entirely different world sitting above all of this, the extreme north. The Northern Territories.
Comprising Nunavut with its capital Iqaluit, the Northwest Territories governed from Yellowknife, and the Yukon anchored by Whitehorse.
I kept trying to find a good analogy for the North while reading this.
Yeah.
At first, I thought of it as a massive vault.
Oh.
Yeah, like it's this landscape of extreme, unforgiving climate. But inside that vault is near incalculable wealth, mining, minerals, natural resources. But calling it just a vault feels, I don't know, wrong. It ignores the people.
Yeah, it is a dangerous oversimplification to view the North purely as an empty treasure chest. And the text is very deliberate in correcting that exact assumption.
Right.
Because this region is home to vibrant, vital indigenous communities who have navigated and thrived in this extreme environment for millennia. It's not empty.
And the guide explicitly links the presence of those communities to a core issue, which is national sovereignty.
This is a crucial modern geopolitical point. The Arctic is rapidly changing. It is becoming much more accessible, and major global powers are increasingly eyeing its resources and its shipping routes.
Everybody wants a piece.
Exactly. But sovereignty isn't just drawing a line on a map and saying, hey, this is ours. Sovereignty requires occupation. It requires presence.
That makes sense.
So the indigenous communities living in the north are the living, breathing manifestation of Canada's claim to that territory. Without them, the North is just an empty map vulnerable to anyone else's ambitions.
Okay, so we've mapped out the physical archipelago. 5 wildly different regions, each with its own economy, climate, and culture. But how did this actually become a single country?
That's the real question.
Who built the infrastructure to connect these islands?
Well, this brings us to the human story. And the ultimate irony of that story is embedded in the very name of the country itself.
I love this detail so much. I mean, we've spent all this time talking about 10 million square kilometers. And then the source drops the fact that the word Canada comes from the word Kanata, which simply, humbly means village or settlement.
Let that irony sink in for a moment.
Right.
The second largest landmass on Earth, a geopolitical giant stretching across 3 oceans, takes its name from an indigenous concept of a small, localized, intimate settlement.
It's poetic, really.
Totally.
And the guide breaks down the architects of this massive village into 3 founding peoples. First, the Aboriginal peoples, which encompasses 3 distinct groups, the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis, then the French and the British.
And those 3 pillars, Indigenous, French, and British, they form the bedrock of the nation's civic DNA. Almost every major political tension, compromise, and triumph in the country's history stems from the interactions between these founding groups.
The timeline the text provides moves incredibly fast. We start with Samuel Champlain founding Quebec City in 1608, planting that deep, enduring French root in North America. But the true turning point, the moment the modern nation is forged, is 1867, Confederation, the birth of the Dominion of Canada.
And we have to look at why Confederation happened then. It wasn't just a friendly agreement over tea.
Like, let's be a country.
Right, no. In 1867, the United States had just emerged from the Civil War. They had a massive battle-tested army right on the border. And there was a very real, palpable fear among the separate British colonies in North America that they were going to be swallowed up or annexed by the Americans.
Oh, so Confederation was essentially a defensive maneuver.
A defensive maneuver and an absolute economic necessity.
Okay.
The colonies realized that if they didn't bind together, if they didn't build a railway to connect the East to the West, if they didn't create a unified domestic market, they simply would not survive independently.
Wow.
So they formed a single dominion, and Sir John A. Macdonald became the first prime minister to lead it.
But signing a piece of paper in 1867 doesn't automatically create a national identity.
Right?
Right. And that's why the text highlights a completely different kind of milestone. Not a treaty, but a battlefield. The Battle of Vimy Ridge in 1917 during the First World War.
Yeah, Vimy Ridge is a profound moment of psychological shift for the country.
Why is that?
Well, prior to that, Canadian troops largely fought as fragmented units under British command. But at Vimy, all 4 divisions of the Canadian Corps fought together as a single, cohesive national unit for the very first time.
Oh, I see.
And they achieved a military objective that both the British and French armies had previously failed to take.
The guide makes it clear that this was the moment the country stepped out from the shadow of the British Empire. Like, they walked onto that battlefield as colonial subjects, and they walked off as an independent nation forged in unimaginable sacrifice.
Exactly. It solidified their place on the world stage, not as a subsidiary, but as a sovereign actor.
So we have the geography, we have the history, we have the sacrifice. But how do you actually manage this massive machine today? Like, what is the Canadian operating system that keeps all these regions from just flying apart?
The guide defines the governmental framework with 3 distinct overlapping labels. It says Canada is a constitutional monarchy, a parliamentary democracy, and a federal state.
Okay, pause. I have to put myself in the shoes of someone learning this from scratch.
Yep.
I am looking at the words monarchy and democracy. Now, monarchy means crowns, kings, queens, inherited power. Democracy means the people hold the power, they vote, they decide. How on earth can a system be both at the exact same time without completely imploding?
I know, it sounds totally contradictory until you understand how cleverly they divided the responsibilities of power. Think of it like a game.
A game.
Yeah, you need players who are aggressively trying to win, but you also need a referee who enforces the rules of the game itself. In this system, the politicians are the players. The crown is the referee.
Okay, unpack that. How does the democracy part work for the average citizen?
So in a federal election, citizens do not vote directly for a prime minister.
Right.
They vote by secret ballot for a local representative in their specific geographic area. That person becomes a member of parliament, or MP. The political party that manages to get the most MPs elected forms the government. That elected body is the engine of the democracy. They debate, they pass laws, they spend the money.
So if the elected parliament is doing all the actual governing, what is the monarch doing? Does the king just sit across the ocean and occasionally veto things he doesn't like?
No, not at all. And that is where the constitutional part of the constitutional monarchy comes in. The monarch is entirely bound by the Constitution.
Yeah.
They don't govern, they don't write laws. The crown acts as the ultimate stabilizing figurehead. It represents the historical continuity of the state and the fundamental rule of law.
So symbolic.
Symbolic, but structurally vital. It means that the highest authority in the land is not a politician who might be tempted to abuse their power. The crown basically holds the symbolic roof up so the elected parliament can safely govern inside the house.
That actually makes a lot of sense. And then the third label is federal state, which, going back to our archipelago metaphor, feels absolutely vital.
It is the only way to govern 10 million square kilometers.
Yeah.
You cannot have a bureaucrat sitting in Ottawa trying to figure out how to fund a specific hospital in Yellowknife or manage a logging dispute in British Columbia.
Right, the scale's just too big.
Federalism divides the workload. The national government in Ottawa handles the big stuff-so military foreign policy, international trade. Meanwhile, the provincial and territorial governments handle the intimate daily mechanics of life: healthcare, education, highways.
But with all these politicians, provinces, and regions pulling in different directions, what protects the individual citizen? The guide points to a massively important piece of legal software that runs this whole system: the 1982 Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Yes. This is the legal shield for every individual in the country. It explicitly guarantees fundamental freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, democratic rights, mobility rights across all those massive provinces.
And it is all underpinned by the concept that the guide stresses relentlessly: the rule of law. And this isn't just legal jargon, right?
Not at all.
It means that nobody is above the law. Not the wealthiest CEO in Toronto, not a local mayor in Saskatchewan, not the prime minister, and crucially, not the government itself.
The rule of law is the gravity that keeps the archipelago from floating away into chaos. I mean, think about it. If the government itself doesn't have to obey the law, then the Charter of Rights is just a piece of paper with nice suggestions.
Right, totally.
The rule of law is what gives those rights actual teeth.
The guide also emphasizes shared civic rituals to bind the country together, particularly November 11th, Remembrance Day. It's this powerful, synchronized moment where the entire sprawling nation pauses. From the busy ports of Halifax to the tech hubs of Vancouver to the freezing tundra of Nunavut, the country stops to honor the sacrifices made, at places like Vimy Ridge, for example, to secure the very freedoms and democracy we just outlined.
Yeah, it is a deliberate act of collective memory. You have to actively remember what it costs to build and maintain the system.
So we have covered an incredible amount of ground today, from the bilingual history of New Brunswick to the strategic choice of Ottawa.
Right.
From the raw power of the prairies to the geopolitical stakes of the high Arctic.
We've seen how a 17th century settlement evolved into a modern, three-part democratic state driven by the rule of law.
Now, if you are looking at all this and thinking, there is no way I can memorize all these capitals, dates, and constitutional mechanics, the study guide actually offers a brilliant piece of advice, and I want to pass it directly to you, the listener. It says, do not try to brute force memorize this material. Do not just stare at a list of dates.
Because rote memorization completely misses the mechanism of how history actually works.
Exactly. The guide says, treat it like a story. Listen to how the pieces connect. If you forget the capital of Manitoba or you blank on the exact year of Confederation, don't punish yourself. Just go back and revisit the story.
Right.
Understand why the prairies exist as a breadbasket, or why the nation had to confederate to survive. Once you understand the why, the what naturally falls into place.
It really is the story of how incredibly diverse peoples adapted to and ultimately unified an overwhelmingly hostile landscape. And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Let's hear it.
Think back to that original word, Canada, a small, intimate village.
Yeah.
Now contrast that with the staggering reality of a 10 million square kilometer giant. How does a single nation balance the localized, intimate needs of its deeply rooted indigenous communities, its French heritage, and its British framework, while simultaneously holding together a geography that spans 3 oceans and Arctic ice? It is a constant daily balancing act.
It really is. It's the challenge of trying to nurture a village while living in the body of a giant. Thank you for taking the plunge with us on this deep dive into Canada's civic DNA. Until next time, keep exploring this story.